My name is Frances Rowland. I am a member of the Diocesan Pastoral Team, and tonight we're going to look at celebrating and marking Lent in 2025. So, if it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start with a moment of prayer. And as we begin this moment of prayer, it's a hymn that's based on the prayer of St. Richard of Chichester. A piece of music that some of us might know from Godspell, Day by Day, Dear Lord, of these three things I pray. And I've chosen it tonight because really it, at its essence, it holds what we're about in Lent.
Thanks be to you, our Lord Jesus Christ, for all the benefits which you have given us, for all the pains and insults which you have borne for us. Most merciful Redeemer, friend and brother, may we know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly, day by day. Amen. May we know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly, day by day, day by day, day by day.
So, welcome to those who have arrived in since we started to pray. So, tonight's workshop is about Lent, and I thought we'd begin, if that's okay with you, I thought we'd begin with what Lent is about. So, if I'm going to bring you back to my slides, if that's okay. And this year we enter into Lent not just as Christians, as disciples, maybe as people who've done Lent 20, 30, 40 times before, but as people who are in the midst of a Jubilee year. So what might it mean for us to enter Lent as part of the Jubilee, as a pilgrim of hope? So I'm going to ask you just for a moment, just for yourself to just reflect on that. What are you hoping for as a pilgrim of hope as you enter into this Lenten time? What's the dream, the hope, the flame that's burning within you in desiring something as we enter into Lent? And then, as in each year, we're called to three actions: an action of prayer, an action of fasting, and an action of giving, almsgiving. Charity sometimes is the language used. So I'm going to ask you for a moment, just for yourself, to reflect on what is the prayer that's in your own heart at this time? What are you praying for? Who are you praying for? Perhaps the most talked about aspect of Lent is that of fasting. And perhaps we've had a habit as a child of fasting from certain things, and perhaps that's gone into adulthood. In years gone by, we might have had Operation Transformation in the weeks coming up or into Lent, and people might see it as a good time to, pull back from the table. But really, when we talk about fasting during Lent, what are we talking about? What are we pulling back from? What are we stepping away from? And why? So in our fasting, there's a desire to grow closer to the Lord. And so what are the things I might need to fast from? Could be food. It could be the way I spend my time. It could be the way I spend my money. I might need to fast from things that I know are not good for me, that don't help me draw closer to humans, to other people, who don't help my relationships. Things that, kind of increase my maybe sense of isolation or my selfishness or my disconnect from community. So again, just each of us for a minute, maybe just, and this is just for ourselves, what might I need to fast from this Lent? And then finally, we give. And we give out of that space of prayer and fasting. We give out of the fact that we've kind of let go of things like tendrils of plants that have been kind of maybe choking us, sucking the energy out of us. And it's in creating that space that we have something to give. And again, it may be giving of time, it may be giving of attention, it may be giving of worldly goods, money, or things that we have that we can share with others. But again, maybe just for a minute for yourself to reflect on, okay, where am I seeing that people are in need of something? So you're giving into people's need. Where do I see a need in my locality, in my town, in our county and diocese, and in our world? Who is in need and needs us to give to them? And then for those of us who have lived through Lent many times, I found a lovely message from Pope Francis in talking about the Jubilee, but I think it also refers to Lent.
Sorelle e fratelli, ricominciare. Questa è la parola, ricominciare. Ricevere la terra da capo, come la prima volta. Mettiamoci questo alla testa e diciamo tutti insieme, ricominciare, diciamo insieme, ma non sento bene, ma sono un po' sordo, non sento bene. Ecco, non dimenticatevi di questo, ricominciare.
So this time of Lent, this time of being together, this time of drawing back maybe from what has preoccupied us over the last number of months, this time of drawing apart so that we can hear something afresh. It's a recommencing, it's a restart. So I suppose, it's to remember that for ourselves, because sometimes we can kind of go, oh yeah, I always do this for Lent. We can kind of go into that old space rather than moving into the fresh space of let us begin again. Let us move into the new space. So just for a moment, I'm going to pause our piece. I'm going to send you out into a breakout room. You'll meet one other person out there and maybe just ask them, what it might be like to start again. And I see some of you are in a group already, so my apologies if you ended up in a room with one other person in that regard. I was having some technical difficulties here, and I just wanted to make sure things were okay. So there's three things we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at Trocaire and the message of Trocaire this Lent, which is very appropriate to our Jubilee year, as it always is to Lent and to us as Christian people. We're going to look at our focal space, or maybe you call it your sacred space, and we're also going to look at family Mass. So without further ado, I'm going to move into looking at the the Trocaire resources. And just to say, I am recording this. Nothing that you say will be left on it. I'll edit it at the end, but don't hesitate if you want to ask a question to put up a hand or to indicate through the chat box, just so that we know that we can have any clarifications you need. But it'll also be just up on the diocesan website and our YouTube channel, and therefore you can access it whenever you wish. I don't know why that happened, but we'll go again. We'll try it again. For whatever reason, technical problems today. Okay, I think that should be good. And you can text me, those of you who have my number, just in case there's any worry. So this year we're with Trocaire in Guatemala. And so I just thought I'd put a little map up there of where Guatemala is. It's in Central America. Many of us may remember it from back in the 80s, when it would have had a lot of difficulties. And that's actually when Trocaire started working in Guatemala. And you'll see it's surrounded by Mexico, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. Okay, so this year the Lenten campaign centres around the story of a family within a community from La Paz in Guatemala. And Ilma and Julio and their family live with 24 other families in a very small community called the Maya Quechua community. La Paz means peace, and they speak Quechua, one of the many languages that are indigenous to Guatemala. They have 4 children and they depend completely on farming for their livelihood. And as we know from climate change, and even in the last couple of weeks here in our own country, they're experiencing increasingly erratic weather patterns due to climate change. And this is having life-changing consequences on their livelihoods, their well-being, and their future. And you see Ilma and Julio there and their 4 lovely children. And so just to bring you up to date with what's happened just in the last 5 years. So in 2020, they lost all their crops due to a hurricane and storms. And then they all moved, as a community, they moved to higher ground. But of course, they had to start from scratch again. So up in the higher ground, they're better protected from flooding, but extreme weather has made it extremely difficult for their safety. And then they have this erratic weather, which are difficult for growing vegetables or growing anything. And the homes are made of wood with corrugated metal sheet roofing, so the house offers little protection to severe weather. And in May 2024, they had a severe storm. And when the severe storm hit, it took the roofs off the houses and just fired them all around the place. And we've seen pictures of that on a lesser scale here in Ireland over the last couple of weeks. And Ilma, the mother, said she couldn't let her children outside because there was a fear of that trees, etc., collapsing with the severe rain. But she was also fearful inside in the house that the walls would come down and crush the family, or that sheeting from another family's house would hit into theirs. But it was a case of like, if we go out, we're doomed, and if we stay inside, we're doomed. So Julio, their dad, he has 2 hopes, and we're talking about being pilgrims of hope. So Julio, their dad, has 2 hopes. Firstly, they want their children to pursue a secondary education. But of course, if they're struggling to grow crops, then they have nothing to sell. And therefore, if they have nothing to sell, they can't pay the bus, which is €5 a week to send the children to the local secondary school because it's down in one of the towns. So the first priority they have is that their kids would get a good education. And then secondly, that they would have a stronger house using concrete or using cement blocks, because if they've got cement blocks, there's a chance that the house could withstand some of the rain. So imagine for ourselves what that must be like. You have 4 young children and all you want is to protect and support them and enable them to grow into their best lives. So Trocaire is asking us to help this family and this community this year. So I'm suggesting that the Mass that you might focus on, so it's possible to talk about Trocaire at every Sunday Mass, but sometimes I find it's effective that if you choose one of the Sundays in Lent, and there's really only 5 because the 6th Sunday is Palm Sunday, if you choose one of the Sundays in Lent and really focus on Trocaire that night, it really makes a huge difference because it's very concentrated and people get the full story and they can kind of ride with it, as they say. So one of the very simple things is a procession at the beginning of Mass. Bring up the Trocaire box, or you could bring up the Trocaire resort, showing the family. Something that draws our attention right from the beginning of Mass to what we're praying for and who we're in solidarity with. The homily resource this year from Trocaire makes a link between the Gospel and Laudato Si. And it speaks of justice and how are we to be just. The prayer of the faithful is not just for this family and this community, but is seeking justice for people throughout the world. Very key to our Jubilee theme and also to Lent. And then, because I'm suggesting that we might celebrate the Trocaire Mass on the 16th of March, the 17th of March, as you know, is St. Patrick's Day, and the 17th of March is a particular focus for us on immigrants. So we think of all those who've left our land. But we might also remember those who come to our land, and they come because it is less and less tenable for them to live in their own country due to climate change, due to injustice, due to war, due to difficulties. So the two are very linked. And if you want to expand further than that, you could ask a speaker from Trocaire to come to your Sunday Mass. And if you get in touch with Trocaire here in Cork, they are very happy to offer speakers who speak at Masses. You could display the story of the Trocaire country and the family. So let us get to know the story, and you could display it in your parish hallway, in the foyer of the church, or you could display it in your sacred space. You could tell us the story in the parish newsletter, and then you could also ask us to make a connection between what's happening in Guatemala and what we're doing locally. So what I wanted to share with you here is that you could invite somebody from JPIC, that's our Justice and Peace and Integrity of Creation committee here in the diocese, to share resources about what we might do to guard against or to work against climate change and to support a better and healthier climate. You could plant a tree, you could put up a swift box, and the swift is a very important bird because they rear their young in Ireland. They take off and migrate to Africa. In Africa, they are incredibly important because they eat the fly that shares malaria with people. And as the swift numbers go down in the population, the rise in malaria goes up. So by us doing something very small here, it would seem, in Ireland, it has a knock-on effect in Africa. So it's thinking in that way around your Trocaire Mass.
When I first heard about the Clorlin Swift initiative, I thought...
Sorry, and I'm just going to play you a piece from Margaret Cullity. Oops, it'll come back on now. Okay, my technology has decided not to work tonight. So, you will have received a parish booklet and I will email that to each one of you. There are Lenten homilies, there's Prayer of the Faithful, there's a newsletter insert so you can keep everybody in the parish aware of it. It has a little insert too around Jubilee Year, which you could put in your sacred space, or you could put up in your parish foyer of the church. It's got reflections on Laudato Si. Again, they can be shared in that way. And there's a second resource this year, which is called Listening to Nature. And it's a way really for parish communities to reflect on how they might share in making an action towards climate change, in climate justice, I suppose, making an eco-action as a parish. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to hand over to Ailish, my colleague. So wait till I just find... Okay, and here she is. Ailish, will you talk to us a little about music?
I will, of course. Sorry, everybody, my internet decided to play up tonight, and if I'm slightly jittery, it's the internet, unfortunately. So good evening, everyone. My name is Ailish O'Connor, and I'm based in Castleisland. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about music for Lent. I suppose the first thing to say is we have no Alleluia during Lent. So just to remember that you won't be singing Alleluia during Lent. And I think I've listening to Frances there, and I think something that struck me was there was two things that struck me in her first slide there. One of them was about the giving and how those of us who are working with music can use our gifts and our talents musically to give this Lent. Might be something we could do. And also the fact that praying was something she mentioned as well. And praying, to sing is to pray twice, is one of those famous sayings. So maybe that's something to remember when we're doing it. Maybe we can begin again to use our singing as prayer within the Mass as well. And remember, it is actually prayer. So it'll be good to begin again as the Pope, as Pope Francis has reminded us. So as I said, the start of Lent is coming up, and obviously we don't sing our Alleluia during Lent. So there are various different other ones that you can use, and I'm sure most of you have something that you use at that time of the year if you sing an Alleluia anyway. I was also there when we were looking at the Trocaire box and talking about the idea of that we're helping people in Guatemala this year. That's one of the focuses. There's some very good pieces that talk about the church being as one, such as Though We Are Many, which is in the back of that new yellow book that we have with all the hymns in it, or with all the settings of the Mass in it, I should say. So that's one that you could use. Though we are many, we are one body. So the idea that we're all one body together, and that we're a global church and that we can all work together. That's a nice one that you can use as an entrance hymn. It also works as a recessional hymn. So there's lots of different ways in which we can involve everybody as well in the Mass. We needn't just do hymns. We can also do things like instrumental pieces, and a lot of us have some very good Irish musicians in our communities, and it might be something where we have a procession and we're bringing up that Trocaire box or other symbols that Francis will talk about soon, I'm sure, that maybe we could at those times use some Irish airs, like O'Carroll's Concerto or Magillamar, which is also Faithful is the Lord, which they say it's the same tune, it's just word set to it. I think Liam Lawton has a setting of Faithful is the Lord to the tune of Magillamar. So they're ones that we could use during Lent for entrances and recessionals. We can also use things like City of God, Christ be our light. Just make sure you don't use the Easter verses, because there's two different sets of verses there. So there's lots and lots of different ones that we can use throughout Lent. Just thinking here, the parish anthem is great, and it's one that the children learn in schools as well, which would be a good one to use. Grow in Love is another one. Seek Ye First, or if you want to use a mixture of Irish and Latin, you've got Deus Meus. They're all very good hymns that we can use during Lent for entrances and recessionals. I would also suggest during communion time, I'm going to talk about communion time for a second. We could look at things like the servant song. If we're trying to be servants to one another, and we can be of how can we be of service to others? How can we pray for others? How can we give to others? So the servant song does reflect that in a lot of ways. I Will Be the Vine is another one good there, that we're all parts of the one vine, and how we can give to others during Lent as well. Here I Am, Lord, what can I do? That tune. What can I do to serve? All of these things will tie in with a lot of what we're actually doing here. Now, Francis, I'm not sure. Do you want me to keep going here, talking about different hymns, or will we?
Go on, you keep going.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to have a look at responsorial psalms. I think we're going to talk about family masses as well, maybe later on. So there are a few there that I've mentioned already, like Grow in Love and Parish Anthem and City of God. They're all hymns that children will be familiar with too. So maybe this could be a time of beginning, where we begin to bring children and families into our worship with us, and giving them an opportunity to participate by singing in the congregation, or perhaps joining the choir to sing with them. And responsorial psalms that would work there would be things like My Shepherd is the Lord, is one that the primary schools would be quite familiar with. And also The Call, there's another one called The Call. There are two nice ones. But for ourselves then, if we're looking at adult singing, we've got The Cry of the Poor, Keep Me Safe, O God, that's a lovely one. And if we're looking at Irish ones, Shean Tír na Muire and Mugrahu are two lovely ones as well, that do tie in with the theme of Lent as well. Sometimes after the prayers of the faithful, it can be nice to reflect, especially if you're doing a mass where you're trying to draw particular attention to things. And I think prayers of the faithful can be a time when we can reflect there on the symbols that have gone up at the start of Mass, like the Trocaire box. And there are lots of other symbols I know that Francis is going to talk about. But if you wanted to draw more attention to them, perhaps you could sing the response after the prayers of the faithful. And there's a few there. You could use the Tese, O Lord, hear our prayer, which is one that children are familiar with as well. And Lord, Hear Our Prayer by Liam Lawton is a good one there as well. There's also a piece called Open My Eyes, Lord, but the second verse of that is actually called Open My Ears. So that would be another one that you could use there, that encouraging people to listen to the Word of God might be a nice one to use there. But I think probably Lord, Hear Our Prayer by Liam Lawton is one of the best ones there, to be honest. Then we have the presentation of the gifts. So we were bringing up the bread and wine. Again, this should be always about offering gifts to God and bringing gifts of bread and wine to the altar. So we do our other procession at the start of Mass, where we're bringing up the Trocaire box, etc. That would be the start of Mass. And then at the presentation of gifts, it's just the bread and wine. So songs like We Come to You, Lord Jesus. Again, that's a universal one that I think everybody knows, and the children would certainly know as well. In bread we bring you, Lord. Lord, accept the gifts we offer. A Christ and Shield. All of those are lovely pieces that are easy to do, and that people will know. And I suppose ideally at Lent, it's something we're working together towards. We're working towards Easter. We're reminding ourselves that we're a community, and a global community at that. So the more we can participate in the singing, and the more the congregation can join in, it's even better again. Again, there you could use instrumental pieces, quiet and reflective pieces. Like I suggested, the Irish airs, or you could take any of those tunes and play them at that particular time as well. Maybe to give people a chance to think and pray and reflect as well at that time on the gifts of the bread and wine. Where am I coming to next? You've got all your little parts of the Mass there. As I said already, it's only the Alleluia that you have to worry about at Lent, that we're not singing the Alleluia. So the next big moment that you're coming to really, I suppose, is the communion hymns. So there already I've said things like Servant Song or Christ Be Beside Me is a lovely one. And again, I think for the 16th, when we're coming into St. Patrick's Day the following day, it's a kind of a preparation for that idea of Christ Be Beside Me, because we know we associate that with St. Patrick's breastplate as well. Another one or two that the children would know, like they would know that one definitely, Christ Be Beside Me. They'd also know things like O Sacrament Most Holy and Céad Míle Fáilte Rót. A lot of those would be used for communions and confirmations, so they'd have learnt them in school. and I think it ties in with their religious education program in school as well. I Will Be the Vine, the Last Supper, which we would have done, any of you that were involved in the Mass with the Pope in the Phoenix Park, we'd have sung that for there. And then you things like The Weaver, which has by Liam Lawton, which has an instrumental part as well as, so if you have got your Irish musicians in anyway, you could also include them here as well. Again, as I said before, Here I Am, Lord, and Amazing Grace are other hymns that are used at this time of the year as well, and are ideal communion hymns as well. Okay, and then after communion, you may, if you were having a reflection, there's lots of different reflective pieces out there. So maybe rather than a spoken reflection, it could be a sung reflection. For example, things like Make Me a Channel of Your Peace, or I've mentioned Open Our Eyes, Lord. You could use that here. Things like the Beatitudes or Lay Your Hands Gently Upon Us. Taizé chants, all of those are reflective pieces that could be used if it was something extra you wanted to add in there for the Lenten season. Or I think if you've had that procession and you've had a homily that ties in with something that you want to reflect on, that the community needs to reflect on, that's an idea to use that there as well. And I've spoken about the recessional pieces again. Go Now in Peace is a lovely one. The Parish Lord is a lovely one as well. That's the one I talked about earlier. That's to the tune of McGill and Mar. They're all lovely ones to use for Lent, and ones that we can learn new ones there. There's the ones that suit the children that we might necessarily know, but children know already. And it's a great way for us to include them in our worship as well. And then there are older ones that other people that everybody will know, that we've heard over and over in our time in attending masses over the years. So I've put in a mixture of the old and the new there. I hope I've given you some ideas. Just remember, no hallelujah. Is that okay, Francis?
That's great. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Ailish. And we might come back to that. And just maybe, I appreciate people are muted and their screens are off, but there's a chat button down in the middle of your screen down the bottom. Just if you've questions, don't hesitate to ask. So you might say, oh God, she mentioned that hymn, but where did she say we should sing it? And there's maybe suggestions you have that we'd love to hear as well, because really it's about the richness of the group here. So I'm going to keep going, if that's okay, and I'm going to look at the focal space, because I know Bishop Ray always comments, particularly at this time of the year when he's going around to confirmations, but also if he's out in different parishes and he is saying Mass somewhere, he always comes back and says, do you know who has a lovely sacred space? So let's look at that next. So what I'd like you to start thinking about when you talk about a sacred space. Now, I'm not as fond of that term. I prefer to call it a focal space, because I believe all of space is sacred, and particularly when we're in a church, it's all sacred space. But you know what I'm getting at. So I'd like you to think about a few things. Why are you creating a sacred or focal space? What's your thinking behind it? So do you want people to think about a particular theme? Do you want to speak to people's senses? Because sometimes Mass particularly can be a lot of words, particularly if we don't have music. So what do you want me to experience as a result of what you've done? So why are you doing it? And the question that follows after that will be, where will you put it? And over the years, some parishes always put it, and maybe it's the best place in their parish, it's there in front of the altar. Others have spaces at the side and they use that. It might be a small altar, or it might be a kind of a little alcove or whatever, and that can be very effective. Sometimes the porch of the church, you know, your notice boards, catch me the minute I come in and I see what you're talking about. So sometimes it makes sense to move your sacred or focal space, because what you're doing is you're catching me unaware, because there's always the danger, if it's always in the same space, that I don't really see it. I see it the first day you put it up and then I lose touch with it. So think about, why you're doing it, where you're going to put it, and then what you're going to put in it and what you want me to have an experience of. And by me, I mean the parishioners, those who visit your church. So it's why you're doing it, where you're putting it, and what. What will be in it? What in some sense, what will speak to someone's heart? And it needs to be something that's different enough to what's happening in the rest of church for it to catch our eye. So if it looks identical to the altar, if it's all sacred vessels within, I'm getting a little bit confused now between the altar and maybe the sacred vessels here. So it's to keep that sense of, okay, you gotta spark surprise, you gotta grab my attention. And then one of the things I love, but now that's just me, is I love it to change during the season, particularly something like the season of Lent, because the season of Lent is 6.5 weeks. And they say our attention span is getting shorter and shorter. So if something is there, on Ash Wednesday, or maybe the night or two before Ash Wednesday, when I've seen it 4 or 5 times, do I no longer see it? Do my eyes glaze over? Where if it changes, and if I know it's going to change, then I'm alert all the time. I'm being drawn to it. And is there a connection between the sacred space or the focal space and what's happening at Mass? So maybe the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is to appeal to my senses. So depending again on where your space is, but draw me in, talk colour, talk shapes, talk sizes, talk different textures, the colour of whether it's sand, whether it's material, whether it's wood, whether it's stones. Do something that draws me in a new way. Think about the colour you're going to have predominantly in this space. Often less is more. So shock me with a big shape or dimension, but 100 small little things and I maybe don't notice anything. They all kind of collide. And then finally, sometimes, and only you know best, sometimes it's helpful to have a simple explanation, maybe not on the ground in it, but maybe over at the side, maybe on a table over at the side, so somebody can read that and then they can sit at the space. I had a lovely experience in the cathedral. They have a beautiful new crib, if you haven't been to see it. It's about 2 years old at this stage, I think. And it's a lovely space just to sit. So the sacred space should allow me just to sit and have something else speak to me. Not necessarily words. It could be the colour, the shape, the images, the austerity of something. So allow it to speak to me. So then when we're talking about this Lent, I thought it might be helpful just to reflect on what Jubilee is about.
Hope does not disappoint, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. 2025 is a year of Jubilee. The word Jubilee comes from the Hebrew word for a ram's horn, which was blown to announce the start of a Jubilee year in the Bible. In the Old Testament, the Jubilee year was a time of renewal and celebration every 50 years. Debts were cancelled, people could rest, and because crops weren't planted, even the land was able to rest. It was also a time of freedom. Prisoners and slaves were freed, and land was given to those who didn't have any. It was known as the year of the Lord's favour. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus read from the prophet Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Jesus makes it clear that his mission is to bring the justice and freedom of the Jubilee. Inspired by his example, we can share in his mission to create a world of justice, peace and love. Now, we celebrate a Jubilee every 25 years. It's still a very special, holy year of forgiveness and mercy, a time to reset and to renew our relationship with God, with one another, and with all of creation. Pope Francis has called this Jubilee year Pilgrims of Hope. It's an invitation to renew our hope, a hope which comes from knowing that God loves each one of us, whoever we are. Pope Francis says, "Pilgrimage is of course a fundamental element of every Jubilee event. Setting out on a journey is traditionally associated with our human quest for meaning in life. Even if we can't travel far away, the Jubilee Year will still be a journey for all of us, a journey of hope. Pope Francis asks us to be signs of hope for others by putting Catholic social teaching into action through caring for our common home and supporting our sisters and brothers who are experiencing war, hunger, or poverty. We know that the world is facing many of these challenges, but you are one of millions of people who are joining together in the Jubilee Year to bring the light of hope and the message of God's love to every part of the world. We can all be pilgrims of hope in 2025, so let's start our journey right now. Pope Francis says, by our actions, our words, the decisions we make each day, our patient efforts to sow seeds of beauty and kindness wherever we find ourselves, we want to sing of hope and reawaken in every heart the joy and the courage to embrace life to the full. Hope does.
So, that's a very clear focus in terms of what the Jubilee is about. It's about justice. It's about right relationship. It's about making good the wrongs. It is about rebalancing of relationships. And we know in our world today that the few people with enormous wealth have more wealth than most other people on the planet. And we can see in even the conversations that are happening at the moment in politics, in world affairs, just how imbalanced our world is. And this Jubilee Year calls on us really to reflect on that and how can we play our part. Now, most of us are not big players in the big roles, but every journey begins with a small step. So we're small steppers here tonight. So I was suggesting that maybe your focal space this year could focus on Jubilee. And Jubilee is a pilgrimage, so it's a journey. And often our Lenten space has taken that shape, of a path. It might be made with stones, it might be made with sand, it might be made with cloth. And then what might you be focusing on in that journey? So I'm going to suggest that you focus on the elements of the logo. So one of the elements of the logo, the strong colours, those 4 colours, is community. There are people moving and going somewhere. Hope is at the heart of what we're about. We are pilgrims on a journey of hope. So hope needs to stand out very strongly in your sacred space. You'll see in our image here, there's a cross, and it's the cross that seems to be guiding them. And the cross is balanced and counterweighted by the anchor. So what's rooting us? And then we see there's movement indicated by the arc of the cross and the anchor, but also by those waves at the bottom. And then finally, there's a reaching out to one another. Each one is reaching forward to the one in front. Do you see that there in the image? And ultimately, I suppose, if we're walking forward together, we're reaching out to those who are in front of us, those who are around us. So I was wondering about how we might depict this. So this is a suggestion, and you can make it your own way. So I was thinking in terms of community, it could be different people, it could be different flags, and perhaps it could be part of the opening procession at your first Lenten Mass, that first Sunday. So the people or the flags could be carried in the procession and then placed in the sacred space. So now you're drawing our attention at the beginning of Mass to this focal space. That sense of being propelled by hope. Our hope is in Jesus Christ. So the candle, a large white candle, might be carried forward on the second Sunday and again placed in the focal space. A cross. Now it needs to be a decent sized cross, not a tiny little one. A decent sized cross. So it's that cross that really makes sense of our lives. We say, by your cross and resurrection, you've set us free. And the Jubilee Year is all about freedom. Freedom from poverty, freedom from bondage, freedom from all that holds us unfree. And then anchor. I was wondering how you might, if you're in a fishing community, chances are you'd be able to find an anchor. But you could also fashion one from something like styrofoam or wood or cardboard. But what's anchoring us? What's rooting us? That might be the reflection that week. And then that movement. So the pieces or maybe your candle needs to move through your sacred space so that we get that sense of we're going somewhere, getting closer to Easter, which is the high point of our faith. And then that reaching out to other could be depicted in our Sunday on Trocaire. And I was just suggesting the 16th of March, but any Sunday that works for you as a community would be absolutely fine. So it's that reaching out to one another, telling the story of people who've been left unfree because of the actions of others. And we know through our hearing of Trocaire's work that those who are most impacted by climate change are those who've done the least to affect climate change. So it's maybe hearing that story and reflecting on it. It might be part of our penitential rite. Sorry. So it's maybe to think, how would that work for you in your own parish? And you might say, do you know what? We might use the emblem, but we're only going to maybe bring something forward 2 of the Sundays. Absolutely. Or we're going to put everything in there on the very first Sunday and invite people into the space and to think about the space during the ensuing weeks. There's no wrong way to do it. There's the way that works best for your parish. All I'd be suggesting is maybe try and do something slightly different to last year so that you don't get into my habitual memory. They say that the best way to keep ourselves alive and youthful is that we keep having to create new synapses for our brain. So if we keep doing the same thing, we don't create new pathways and we don't see things afresh. So perhaps this Lent, you can invite us as a parish community to see things afresh by moving something around slightly different to last year so that we're alert to it. And sometimes a little change is more helpful than lots of change, and that can be chaotic maybe for those who are preparing and maybe for those who are receiving. So I leave that wisdom with you. Eilish spoke a lot about family, and she spoke about the pieces of music that are being learned by the children in Grow and Love. A great thing to do during Lent is to have a family mass. Because each of us belongs to a family, big, small, people close at hand, people flung all over the world. And maybe you might ask yourself again, why would we have a family mass? Well, the first reason is it helps children to enter into the ceremony. We often say it's a terrible thing that there's no children, no young people at mass. But sometimes mass is a very adult experience. And if we don't make it possible for them to enter into the present day experience, it means that in time to come, they haven't got a habit of it and they will be unable to take a more active part and a conscious part in their full Eucharistic community. So let's think about, are there ways of involving families in our community this year? And I'm involved with the children's liturgy here in Killarney, and I often think that even at the children's liturgy, the fact that the children are brought aside for a little while means that parents can hear the message of the gospel and the message of the homily with a freer ear and a freer heart because their children are occupied in another way. So there might be just something of trying something new this year. So what would I be suggesting? There's lots of possibilities. And again, I'd say if you've never done anything, maybe try one thing or 2 or 3, better than nothing. So in the gathering rite, you could do something like making sure the altar servers are present. So kids love to see other kids. They love to see what they can become. Altar servers remind the little kids that this is a role that they can take on. They remind us that actually they have a place in our ministry. You might like to make sure you have some children's hymns. It's okay if the adults don't know them. If the kids know them, they'll sing them with gusto. Very often children's hymns are easy enough. We'll come back to you, Eilish, and ask you if that's true. But I think they're often easy enough and repetitive, and therefore we can join in after 1 or 2 goes. You could gather the children They could be part of the procession, but you could also gather something from them. So you could invite them, you could give them a colouring or something the week before and ask them to bring them up the following week, and we can place them around the altar. So now you've invited the kids to bring their week's work into the heart of the Mass. As I said, they could be part of the opening procession. We could have the sprinkling rite as the penitential rite. Kids love movement, things that are happening, gestures. That's what keeps them alive and active. So sometimes the experience of Mass can be one person speaking a lot. Sometimes we as the congregation don't say an awful lot. Maybe we mumble through our responses. So kids are kind of sitting, watching. It's not a really great place for a kid. So let's involve them as best we can. And then finally, some of you will remember that when we were changing the Mass responses, we had congregational sheets. We still have some here in the diocese. You might like to use those at your family Mass. Kids love to be able to read once they're any bit of age, or even for the parents to be able to point out to them, we're this stage, we're this stage. It even gives them a sense of how far on we are in the Mass. And you might remember that those congregational sheets also showed whether you're to sit or to stand, and things like that keep kids involved. My own memory as a child, and I know it was very different times, but I used to be fascinated. My mother'd stand up and she'd sit down and she'd kneel. And I remember even as a child going, how does she know? Like, it was kind of like a mystery to me up until a certain age. So there's some possibilities. When you get to the liturgy of the word, I don't know if you can see the picture there, but this father is reading at Mass, but his little child is up beside him. Not always to be recommended, but sometimes that's okay. It reminds us they need to hear the word, and we need to speak a word that they can hear. So I'd be saying you could have a simple refrain to the responsorial psalm, something that the kids can also say. You could use the gospel from the children's lectionary. And I'll give you the one for a particular Sunday, but if you want one for any other Sunday, just contact me. You could have an interactive homily. Now, that's something you need to be kind of very comfortable and maybe a little bit practiced, maybe have a group that are ready to answer you. Otherwise, it could ensue into chaos, as you know. And then prayer with faithful, have very simple language and maybe a simple sung response. Again, that the kids can enter into. And when we come to the liturgy of the Eucharist, I think a beautiful moment is always the bringing forward of the gifts. We don't do it often enough in many of our churches. And whatever about anybody bringing forward the gifts, that's a beautiful thing. It reminds us that what we're giving to God, and it is for God's use. And then God gives it back to us in renewed form, in himself. But here in the image, you see, there's a family bringing forward the gifts. Mum, Dad, and the two little one-ins. How will kids learn how to give, how to gift others if we don't teach them? So this is a gorgeous moment when they can bring forward, and they don't have to bring the cruets. Mum and Dad can bring the cruets or anything that's very spillable, but they can bring something small. And then there's that sense of belonging and taking part in the Mass. So the presentation of the gifts, you could use a Eucharistic prayer for children. You could have a child-friendly reflection action at, we'll say, the Our Father. You could invite all families to hold hands. Or you could invite the children to hold the hands of people around them. So, if they're at Mass with one parent or with granny or granddad, they might hold the hand of somebody else. Now, it's not to stop adults holding hands, but that's up to yourselves. You could invite the children to give the sign of peace to people around them. And again, it extends, it gives them something to do, but it also brings a joy to all our hearts when we remember, actually, this is what it's about. It's about peace. It's about inviting each person into a real relationship of care and wanting the best for them. And then finally, you could invite them to come forward for communion. Those who are old enough to receive obviously will receive, but the others will make the gesture. Again, just to invite, show the gesture. They can come forward to the Eucharistic minister or to the priest. But again, the child isn't left in the pew on their own. They're going forward, they're taking part. And then finally, I'd be suggesting in the closing rite that we don't want the kids going home like this little lad in the picture where it looks like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. Let me out of here. There's so many possibilities. So sometimes children respond well to silence. So it could be after communion, just asking everyone, in a kind of a stage whisper, do you want to close your eyes and just be thinking about what you want to ask Jesus for in this sacred moment? And kids are great at closing their eyes, and they're used to doing that in school and entering into that space. You might like to send families home with something. So it might be a little candle to light when they're gathering that evening for their evening meal, or, when they're saying the prayers together. It might be a Trocaire box, and to talk about the story at home. It might be those lovely sheets that are done by some of the groups who do the missalettes. And again, you're sending the child out, you're saying, continue talking about this message, continue talking about the story, continue talking about the experience. And in that way, you're making the connection between what's happened at the liturgy and what's happening in life. And then finally, invite them to be part of the procession as you go out. In fact, sometimes them going out as part of the closing procession is just very natural. Some of you might remember Padraig McIntyre, who's now Brother Padraig McIntyre in Glenstall Abbey. I remember he told me at least he was the first person who said to me, the recessional hymn should accompany us as we go. So often we stand there and we wait until the recessional hymn is over, rather than dancing down or moving with joy, delight and energy to go out and to do what we have prayed about, what we've talked about, what we're called to be. So it's that last moment of out we go. And so I'm suggesting that maybe Sunday, March the 30th, it's the fourth Sunday of Lent, might be a good Sunday to involve youngsters, because the gospel is that of the prodigal son. So it's a very easy story to tell. It's very real. There's dad and the two boys. It's a story that children will get, and there are child-friendly versions of that gospel. And then just finally, the other resources that are available to you through the diocesan website, and they'll be going up now on Friday. You have the Ash Wednesday prayer card, should you need to say a prayer with somebody who's receiving the ashes at home, in a nursing home, etc., or maybe in the schools. There's the Lenten prayer service, and that incorporates the distribution of ashes. There's the Lenten calendar. You might remember that it links with the scripture passages of the Sunday, and it's just a thought for the day. Sometimes people find it helpful as a way to pray through the season. There's a selection of prayers and reflections. Again, they might be used in your parish newsletter. You might like to put one every week in your beside your sacred space, not in your sacred space. After all I've said about looking at the images and the symbols. And then there's a selection of Prayer of the Faithful. Both you have those from Trocaire and also others that we've created during the years. And then finally, as we come closer to Easter, but lots of people like to pray the Stations of the Cross every day or every week during Lent. There's ones that are good for use personally, and there are ones that are very useful to use as a community. So I'll send those on to you. So I'm going to close there. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to come back. And if you'd like to put on your camera for a moment, I'm sorry, I just see that there was a message that I missed. It might be nice if the focus group had a locked container where people could bring their intentions or crosses during Lent and have those prayed for during the Easter Vigil. The intentions could be burned or shredded after Easter. Brilliant. It's a lovely way. Well done, Kathleen. It's a lovely way to get people involved. So what you don't want is that the focal space sits there as a dead space. You want something that gets people connecting. Well done. So is there anybody who's got a clarification or a question or a suggestion? All of you are well experienced in sharing resources. No? Ailish, anything you want to add to the party? Oh, no parties during Lent. Got to say that. Anything, Ailish, you want to add?
sorry, unmuting myself here again. No, I think I gave Francis, I gave you that list of music, didn't I?
Yes.
So they'll be able to access that as well. If any choir directors or musicians are looking for it. No, I think there's lots there as well in that list that you can do with children, and some of them have actions and things with them. And I think a lot of them, your Our Father thing that you were suggesting there, there's a lot of schools that would teach them the movements for the Our Father who art in heaven. There's a whole lot of them that and they do it for First Holy Communion. So you could get some kids up maybe to do that if they're preparing it for communion anyway. They might have even learned for their first confession and things. So that's another option there maybe as well musically. I loved the symbols and the anchor. I can see everybody going home trying to fashion anchors now, but they won't be praying for you, Francis.
But actually, do you know, you've just made me think, one last thought, it is that sometimes we make a big deal of First Communion children, and of course, it's a very, very special year for them. But I'm always conscious of the other groups. So there's an age group between second class and fifth or sixth, depending on when they make confirmation. So that kind of third, fourth, and maybe fifth class, they can be a great resource because they're able to do things, and particularly in smaller parishes where you have a rural school, you might very easily be able to go in and say, look, can I talk to the teacher who's teaching that group, or can I chat with the teacher who's talking to that group, who's teaching that group, and maybe say, look, is there something they could do at Mass on Sunday? And it's not about making a spectacle of kids. It's not about making them into performers, but it is about enabling them to lead prayer. And really, when they're doing the gestures of the Our Father, what they're doing is they're leading us into prayer. So there's a difference. As Eilish said, if our singing and our enacting and our ministry is all prayer based, then prayer is at the heart of it, and it's us joining and growing and gathering other people into that praying space. So if there are no questions and no clarifications, we're going to leave you at it. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, francisrowland@dioceseofkerry.org. Very happy to answer any questions. And what I'll do is, on Friday morning, all these resources will be sent out. They'll also be put up on the diocesan website. This webinar, or this meeting, will have been trimmed down. All the mistakes will have been cut out, I hope. Apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning, but you can look back and you can kind of move it up and down. There was a lovely clip that started twice, and it was a lovely clip by Margaret Cullity about the Swift boxes. So if you've got a particularly high church, it's a great place for a Swift box, and in doing that, you might help those in Africa who suffer with malaria. So I'm not sure you can say Happy Lent, but I do think it is a season to be enjoyed, not by feasting, but by fasting from that which pulls us away from God, and feasting on that which draws us closer to the one that we say day by day we wish to whom we follow more dearly, follow more nearly, love more dearly, day by day. So with that in mind, let us pray for one another as we enter into Lent 2025. Good night.